I'm Miss Carrie, and I'm going to be presenting this week's book for our First Chapter Friday. This week, we're going to be reading from 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All. And it's a historical fiction, fantasy, sci-fi-ish, set just prior to and then going into World War II. And it tells the story of Frankie, first and foremost. She's a young girl whose father is temporarily placing her in an orphanage. Temporarily. It was supposed to be temporary, but as the book quickly reveals, it doesn't end up being temporary at all. And she's there with her sister and her brother, but it becomes just her and her sister there in the orphanage. And it's not really a nice place to be. Very strict. The nuns are very strict with how they take care of the girls there. And then outside, World War II breaks out. So there's all sorts of chaos going on economically, nationally. Nothing good that Frankie can see outside of the orphanage or inside of the orphanage. And meanwhile, here's the fantasy sci-fi part. There's a ghost, Pearl, who lives in the orphanage, who resides in the orphanage, taking care of the children, restless and not sure why she's there. She thinks that she should be moving on, but she doesn't know why she's stuck there. But she's watching Frankie and feels like Frankie is as trapped as she is. It's an interesting dichotomy. Anyway, I'll start with the first chapter. 13 Doorways, Wolves Behind Them All by Laura Ruby. This is a young adult, I would say, definitely. We begin. Spring, 1946, The Sleep of the Dead. Listen. The first time they took Frankie to the orphanage, she couldn't speak English, only Italian. Voglio mio padre, voglio mio padre. That's what she said, over and over and over. At least, that's what the nuns told her she said. She couldn't remember any of it. The second time they took her to the orphanage, the last time, she didn't say anything at all. Not one word. For months. She didn't remember that either. What she did remember, her father's shoe shop on Irving Avenue, the scent of calfskin and polish, the cramped apartment behind the shop, the metal tub sitting in the middle of the kitchen, cold bathwater wrinkling her little toes, the rough scrape of Aunt Marian's brush on her back, and then the shot from her parents' bedroom, so sharp, so loud, so wrong. The thud of Aunt Marian's footsteps as she ran from the kitchen, the screams, so much screaming. Frankie remembered climbing from the tub, falling to the floor, hitting her elbow so hard the bones sang all the way up to her skull, crawling, hot tears on her face, pushing at the bedroom door to see the body slumped on the bed, smoke and copper in the air, crossing the threshold from one world to another. Most of all, she remembered the door itself, the rusted hinges, the gouges and nicks, the pencil smell of the wood, and then all the other smells that seeped into it, leather, garlic, salt, blood. How Aunt Marian turned, scooped her up, and slammed that door behind them. Frankie wouldn't always let herself remember these things. Most of the time, she didn't think about them at all. Yet, she had her quiet days, her pensive ones. Those days when she dug through her memories, trying to find the truth at the bottom of them. As if the truth were a jewel you could unearth and hold in your hand. As if the truth wasn't more like something you'd find under a rock, gray and faceless and squirming away from the light. But Frankie hadn't done any kind of digging on this particular night in the spring of 1946, unless you counted picking through a garbage pail to find a dime tip she'd accidentally tossed away with a customer's half-eaten sandwich. After working a double shift, she'd gotten home at midnight and collapsed fully clothed onto her bed, not even bothering to take off a mustard-stained apron that stank of onions. And though the air wafting through the window panes held the sweet promise of spring, though all her wars were over, though she should have felt safe, finally safe, after all this time, Frankie woke up hours later in a prickling sweat, tangled and feverish, certain her mother had been whispering in her ear. She sat up, clutching at her throat. "Mama?" she said. But her room was still and silent, the moon cutting a wide silver swath out of the dark. Her mother wasn't there, would never be there. It was impossible. Frankie remembered that now, just when she didn't want to. Then she called again, not to her mother, but to someone else. Someone she'd glimpsed only once. Another person she wouldn't allow herself to think about. Hello? Is that you? No answer. Frankie smiled a grim little smile at her own foolishness, rubbed her eyes to get the sting out. With the moonlight slicing through the room, she could see everything inside it, though there wasn't much to see. A chair with a pile of dresses draped over the back, a bureau with a hot plate and a dusty trumpet, 2 twin beds and a nightstand between, a seashell the size and shape of a child's ear resting in an ashtray on top. Frankie's younger sister, Tony, was a motionless lump in the other bed. Tony hadn't heard Frankie come in or cry out, which wasn't surprising. The nuns used to say that she and Tony both slept like the dead. Once, Frankie had believed that only people whose hearts were true could sleep so soundly, but that was a long time ago. The wind stiffened outside, whistling through the leaky window, blasting Frankie out of bed. She stood just long enough to strip off her apron and uniform. She was being silly and sappy, and she couldn't afford it. Didn't she have more than $16 to add to the wad tucked under her mattress? Hadn't she made the rent for 7 months straight, all on her own? She was just 19, but she'd weathered worse nights, far more pained and feverish than this. The silver swath of moonlight was beautiful. Beautiful, she told herself, and she yanked a nightgown over her head. The whole damned room was beautiful because it was her room, hers and her sister's. That was something she could hold on to, even when so much else had been lost. The moonlight caught in the cup of abalone on the nightstand, winking pink and blue, drawing her attention. Frankie traced the pearlescent edge of the shell with her finger. This delicate shell had come so far, had come through so much, and still wasn't broken. Neither was she. Frankie punched the pillow as if her restlessness were all its fault, and fell back onto the bed, fell asleep. The shadows lengthened, shifted, creeping over the floors. The furniture. Mice scratched in the walls. A fox cried in the distance, or maybe it was a wolf. In and out, the sisters breathed in unison, agreeing for once. And yet, the papery whispers wafted through Frankie's dreams. Sono qui, io sono qui per te, Francesca. I am here for you. Of course, it wasn't her mother's voice she heard. It was mine. Because the dead never sleep, you see. We have so many other things to do. And it goes on from there, dives back into 1941, into the story. I hope you get a chance to check this out and enjoy it.